By the power of the moon, I will podcast you. I'm your host, Hannah.
I'm your other host, David, and we have a special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Sarah. I watch a lot of anime. That's why I'm here.
We all watch a lot of anime,
So
or
much.
at least we did. Hannah was the first to really get me into the wide world of anime.
I corrupted you.
And one of the shows that we watched together concurrently was Puella Magi Madoka Magica, back in 10 years ago now. We're hitting the 10-year anniversary of the show.
Messed up, man.
And in celebration, we thought we would take a look back at magical girl anime, Mahou Shoujo or Madoka anime, which features girls doing magic things.
Girls doing magic stuff, kicking butt and being great.
Right, in the broadest possible definition of the genre. So I thought maybe to start we could talk about our introductions to the genre, our experience with magical girl anime, and what it means to us. Sarah, would you like to start?
Sure. My introduction with magical girl, it's not necessarily as different because I knew Sailor Moon existed, but my initial experience was just my friend telling me all about it. So I just knew about all the characters because she wouldn't shut up and had a Sailor Moon themed room with Sailor Moon covers.
Incredible.
So I watched like maybe an episode or two with her and I was like, oh, this is nice. I'm going to go watch Dragon Ball Z now.
How old were you when?
Oh, this was like elementary school.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, this was elementary school. But then it was later in like when I was starting high school, I actually was like, ooh, I remember hearing about Cardcaptors. I'm going to watch the Cardcaptor Sakura in Japanese because I want to be cool now, because I was just getting into like watching anime on my own online.
Mm-hmm.
And then
what was your source? Where did you
YouTube. It was the YouTube 3 parts.
That was the YouTube era of anime
that.
consumption, back before all of these algorithms could detect, a half a second of copyrighted material from 500 yards. Anyway.
And then from there, I just was watching a lot of anime. And then I initially was like, wait, I should actually watch Sailor Moon. And then I will admit, I did not actually finish Sailor Moon. But I'm a bad magical girl fan, but I did I watched like at least like 100 episodes, which is, it's sad. It's like I didn't finish. I only saw 100 episodes.
And do you have a favorite Mahou Shoujo?
Tutu, Princess Tutu by far.
Oh, yeah. So that's an anime from, I don't know, the early 2000s with like a ballet aesthetic. To the magical girl-ness, and also a storybook aesthetic.
Yeah, it's very meta.
Very meta. How about you, Hannah? What is your experience with magical girls?
Yeah, so it was actually, when we were first kids and these things were airing on, Fox or wherever. Yeah, we didn't know they were this thing called anime. We just knew that they were cartoons. And some of them shared certain like visual elements that were very similar. Right. And so, my sister was actually the one who really got into Sailor Moon. She dressed up as Sailor Moon for Halloween one year, and I would watch along and it was fine. And of course, middle school, when these things came back around and I dove deep into my my anime phase for real, like I think similarly to Sarah, you go back and you revisit these things from your childhood with a new appreciation and with a new interest, and sort of being able to enjoy the maturity of the storylines in a certain way, that because I think that was always the appeal for me in general of anime, was that yes, it's cartoons and they do silly funny things, but that there is at least at the time, there was a level of maturity that wasn't as often found in Western cartoons. They dealt with like more serious topics and characters like disappearing and having real consequences. And like, you know, I think kids are drawn to that because like they understand the basics of storytelling, you know, like they're going to be drawn to the same things that draw in adults in similar ways. So yeah, and then for me, for a favorite, you know, I've gone on to watch a lot, and I think it's very similar to my other taste in anime that I tend to prefer the genre subversions to the like genre trope mainstays themselves. You know, I like Madoka, I like Kill la Kill, I like you know, just all the Tutu even, I would say is a little bit of a subversion to the traditional magical girl anime. Like there's always got to be like something extra, a little twist, you know.
Yeah, for me personally, you said you know, children understand the basics of storytelling, but I seem to recall being a little confused on weekday, you know, weekday afternoons after school, like why Pokemon this week was so weird and like Ash wasn't in it because it was Cardcaptors instead of Pokemon. Like just sort of not really understanding that like two shows can have similar animation styles and not be the same show.
That's so funny. I mean, I think that's a different issue you were having. That's just called face blindness, David.
No, I knew the characters were different, but I just was like, Pokemon is weird this week. But yeah, I thought Cardcaptors was neat, but I didn't really seek out other similar kinds of shows. Mm-hmm. And then I guess, you know, there's just a cultural osmosis thing with Sailor Moon because it infects every American cartoon for the next 20 years.
Yeah. And still does to this very day.
Right.
Like and the movie just came out on Netflix. One of the movies.
Oh, one of the new ones. Yeah.
But of course, you know, for me, you exposing me to Madoka Magica was like a big, exciting moment because it was intentionally trying to take these shows that as a kid you just sort of take for granted as like girly, and I think because, you know, of the way that I was brought up, you see them as kind of frivolous. Mm-hmm. And then this show is turning them on their head and making them seem dark and serious, and when you're a teenager that's very important that things be edgy. But just recently I watched Utena, Revolutionary Girl Utena, and that is my new favorite magical girl anime. I think it's really fantastic and worthy of all of the many video essays that exist on it on YouTube. Just thousands of hours of people just being like, and the symbolism. It's symbolic. Why does Utena turn into a car in the movie?
It's symbolism.
He answered that. He said, the director said, I wanted a cute girl to turn into a car.
Yeah. In an interview, like Transformers.
It's just, you gotta have a car.
And I think, you know, like Transformers, I think transformation is the selling point here. And for kids, I think the idea of turning from your ordinary self into a magical, special self that is pretty and cute and powerful is a somewhat exciting and empowering thing to want to buy and purchase and consume.
Well, and I mean, I think, you know, it's a similar thing to superhero fantasies in general, like power fantasies, like, you know, that you become this powerful person, you know, like you're Peter Parker by day, but you're Spider-Man by night. You know, and it of course comes with a costume change because you got to look cool.
Right. But I think more than a costume change, it's supposed to be like a magical transformation, a sort of leaving of the body, like an escape from the self kind of thing. And that's the escapism of magical girls. I think, you know, when you have, the clothes are changing, but it's like automatic. It's not just like ripping off your Superman suit and then becoming a spandex wearing crime fighter. It's like magically applied clothing. And I think that becomes the symbol of magical girls from Sailor Moon on, basically.
There is one show where it literally is a costume change, and that's Cardcaptor Sakura.
That's right.
All of her outfits are just made by Tomoyo, because she's just like, Tomoyo just goes, well, you can't fight crime if you ain't cute. Here, I'm gonna make you cute clothes.
Right.
But it's still clothes that are sort of foisted upon the character, I guess, rather than like an active decision by them. I think, is that what you're saying, David?
Well, I mean, in that case, it's a subversion, because it's relying on your knowledge of the history of these magical girl shows, where they do transform in most of them. I don't know. Do you guys want to go through like a history of shoujo anime in general and Mahou shoujo in specific?
Take us down the path, Professor.
So I think, like all anime, you can kind of trace it back to, early Japanese comic books, manga, which were typically divided, because they're for kids, into, boys comics and girls comics. And then it doesn't become manga as we know it today until Osamu Tezuka, the creator of Tetsuwan Atamu, or Astro Boy, for those of you who only know the American versions. So he sort of revolutionizes the style of manga. He brings over, the sort of Disney aesthetic into these comics. And, as soon as he's making comics for boys, he's also making comics for girls. And one of the first ones is Princess Knight, which is written in 1953. And it's the story, it's a fairy tale kind of story, because we're drawing from Disney here, where the main character is a princess who, for magical reasons, also has a female heart and a male heart, a boy's heart and a girl's heart inside of her from heaven. And
fucking trans rights, am I right?
Well, kind of, but she, because of the rules of the kingdom that only a man can inherit the throne, she pretends to be a prince for the first, 12 years of her life.
Yes.
And we're following the story of her as this princess knight, trying to, hide the fact that she is a girl. And it was sort of based on this theater tradition in Japan called the Takarazuka Review, which is girls playing both male and female roles and enacting sort of fairy tale like stories. And that was something that Tezuka wanted to adapt. So from the beginning, we have this transformation between male and female, like feminine-ish to like extremely overtly feminine. And then we also have action and, girls fighting monsters, right, and occasionally Satan and,
yes,
things like that.
Oh my God. I gotta find Princess Knight now.
Right. So from the beginning, we have, a serialized narrative, but, there's continuity to it. There's drama, and there's playing with gender roles. From there, that's when we start to get, Japanese television creating a marketing, a viewing block specifically dedicated to magical girl shows, which is, starting in the 60s with Sally the Witch, and then going on to Himitsu no Aku-chan, Marvelous Melmo, and a whole series of magical girl shows, which they called Majoko shows, which means little witch. And this was the screening block dedicated to young girls anime. And they usually were like a little girl who has a magical power that she uses to just do typical everyday things. It was really drawn from like Bewitched in America, because right, Bewitched was very popular in Japan as well. But, just sort of like mundane, sort of comedic vignettes, not a lot of like monster fighting, but a lot of just like, I turned my neighbor into a frog.
Oops.
Oopsie doopsie. But from the beginning, we also have like this introduction of transformation and an age changing as well. Himitsu no Ako-chan, the main character, has a magical mirror that's in a compact. So that, started very early on, that she can use to transform into an adult or into anything really. But often into an adult with a job.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about teaching young girls like what it is to grow up and be an adult, and it was sort of a way of socializing them to an extent, which becomes really explicit with Marvelous Melmo in 1971, which is another Tezuka creation, where a young girl, her parents die, but she gets these magic pills that can allow her to grow 10 years older or 10 years younger. So she takes these pills, and like her body, you can see her transform into an adult.
This is just trans all over.
Yeah, well, I could definitely see that. Although I'm sure that Tezuka didn't really think about those kind of implications back then.
He might have.
Well, he was very concerned with like making women into, making young women into women. He was sort of like this very,
conservative.
He was really trying to teach children how to be grown up. And so Marvelous Melmo is actually a sex education show as much as anything else.
Interesting.
It's about like, teaching young girls about their changing bodies. Yeah. And like Big Mouth, it attracted a lot of controversy for its depictions of sexuality with young people. So one of the weird things about it, if you try and find it today, is there's a lot of panty shots of this 10-year-old turning into an adult, and she's very sexualized in that transformation. And like her clothes stay the same size.
So they just get like shorter.
Yeah. So that's like the beginnings of like the sexualizing of magical girls, which then gets turned up to 11 when Cutie Honey comes out in 1973. Are you guys familiar with this one at all?
Yes, I'm familiar with Cutie Honey. And
do you want to sort of introduce that one for us?
Oh God, okay. I'm more just familiar with Go Nagai as a person, and I will put this way. Go Nagai likes sex, but he's not making this for 10-year-olds at all.
No.
This is more for adults, considering, he's the original creator of Devilman. But my knowledge of Cutie Honey is I've seen the openings, which has boobs. So
many boobs.
I can't really add more on that.
Much boobs.
Oh God, there's like ones where it's like there's sliding panels, and then it's like, oh, her shirt gets opened while the opening plays. So this is the one where I will say this is definitely not, hey little girls, don't you want to be like this? This is for older people for sure.
Except it is though, Sarah.
Really?
I'm gonna disagree with you there.
Oh my God.
In the conception of it, there's this pitch of Cutie Honey is this, or Honey, the character, is this transforming robot, sex doll human. But she can transform into 7 distinct identities, which all represent like potential careers for young women, which is like a trend that you see going through these, that you're trying to establish for young girls, like what are the options? And they're always very limited. To like 6 or 7 possible jobs, one of which is always like stewardess. But yeah, like there is a sense that like in some ways this is for a lot of different audiences that all conflict with each other, that that Go wanted it to be for young girls, yes, but also for young boys who like to see boobs, and for older fans of spy thrillers and mystery stories in general. But this is like the biggest like bad guy fighting magical girl up to this point. So and I know the at least nude transformation is like a huge innovation, I guess, of the genre, if you can call it that.
Yeah, I know it ran in a like shonen magazine at least.
Yeah.
That was the more thing that I knew. So I was like hyper focused on that. I was like, oh, definitely more for the boys.
No, you're absolutely right. But the pitch for the anime, it was competing with another show. I believe it was Majoku Mega-chan, or maybe it was something else. But it was competing with another magical girl show for the slot, and it lost out to this more child-friendly version. And so they changed it after it missed out on the slot to make it more sex appealy and more adult, and more action-oriented for boys, because it was not going to be showing on the dedicated Japanese TV time slot for little girls. So after that, we have more like age-changing anime and transformation sequences. The most popular shows of the 80s were Magical Princess Minky Momo and Creamy Mommy, the Magic Angel.
What a horrible name.
Well, Creamy, it's Mommy like the Japanese
name.
No,
I know, but like, oy vey.
And her parents own an ice cream shop, so get your mind out of the gutter.
Okay, yeah, okay, sure.
Right. And I think it's interesting that around this time, you know, like anime, which is known for its limited animation, as opposed to full animation that you would see in like a Disney feature, that around this time in the 80s is when you start to see in American limited animation shows for kids, more of these transformation sequences in shows like She-Ra and Gem and the Holograms, which both came out in 1985, and both had some Japanese, you know, outsourced animation involved in the production.
Right.
So I don't know, it might be sort of like a parallel thing where if you're selling things to children, you want to have a transformation somewhere in there so that you can save money on the budget by repeating animation, but it might be sort of a cross influence across the East-West divide. And then I think we get to where most Americans are exposed to magical girls is in Sailor Moon in the 90s, which is a big gap for Tokyo TV, but you know, there was a gap in demand for it, and then Sailor Moon reignited it by combining the sort of kind of shonen-y style of Cutie Honey with tokusatsu, Super Sentai, Power Rangers type team up fighting anime. And that, I think, really redefines the genre for the rest of time. And then it's not until, you know, 2005 or, you know, 2010 even, that you start seeing a lot of these subversive genre bending versions aimed at adults, sort of critiquing Sailor Moon and shows before it. So that's sort of my intro to Mahou Shoujo for you guys.
For someone who didn't grow up with the genre, you did a really good job.
Well, I tried to do a lot of research and looking at fan accounts, as well as, you know, more more historical accounts of just like TV production.
So, you know, we've talked around it a little bit, but I think we should just go through and like bang out like what are the basic ass tropes of a magical girl anime, you know, that we're going to see eventually subverted and remixed and reimagined and critiqued, and maybe not critiqued, you know, like you mentioned the transformation sequence and how that has sort of become a staple and a mainstay,
which goes back to Aka-chan or even to Princess Knight if you want to trace it back that far with like the costume changes, but has really changed and was really, I think, defined by Cutie Honey and the idea of like she strips off all of her clothes to show the audience what the goods are, and then magically applies and creates clothes out of nothing. And, you know, like you see the individual parts of the costume sort of come into being on her, and then that really gets, you know, cemented as like the central thing of the genre by Sailor Moon, right?
Yes, yeah, for sure.
And then Sailor Moon also, I think, establishes like a pretty consistent formula of crime fighting, monster fighting, and the idea of like making a contract with a magical furry animal thing that will give you the power in exchange for helping them save the world.
Yeah.
Also, definitely with Sailor Moon, like there might be others, but that's the first one I can think of where Sailor Moon is the focus, but you also have the whole teamwork aspect. And because so many of the episodes are episodic, you can go like into more of like, oh, these two characters are having a problem and they're fighting, and it's usually always Usagi and Rei. It's like, how are they gonna resolve this to fight the monster?
No, that's a really good point, Sarah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the persistence of like shoujo comics, which were typically more personal life and relationship based rather than monster of the week fighting shows, then gets sort of blended with the shonen aesthetic, the boys comic aesthetic of just fighting and getting stronger and getting new powers and whatnot. And I think like Sailor Moon is like maybe the most essential blending of those two.
Yeah.
And the fact that it draws so much from the Super Sentai themes of teamwork that you would see in Power Rangers and all of these other team up fighting, Voltron or whatever, like all of the boys shows that were about teamwork. The fact that now we have a girl show that's about teamwork. And friendship is a huge innovation that helps the marketability as well as just the enjoyment of it. But what about the I'm interested in like what of these different like character types, what kind of character tropes persist throughout all of these shows, and why might they appeal to young girls?
Well, I definitely think like with each of the characters kind of has like, if you can narrow it down to like, oh, this is the smart one, this is the, she's brainy, oh, this one is like, super strong and like not just physically, also has a strong soul. And by having all the different character types, each, like when you talk to like a Sailor Moon fan, like you'll get like a million different answers for, oh, who's your favorite of the Sailor Scouts? Like, and every girl will at least get at least a few people that's like, oh, that one's my favorite. Like personally, my favorite is basic bitch answer, but Usagi, Sailor Moon, has always been my favorite just because, like I think I mentioned before, I like the fact that she's stupid. But she's stupid, but she's strong of soul and she's caring. And I remember I always asked friends, I was like, oh, do you guys think I'm like Sailor Moon? And they would tell me, it's like, no, you're not stupid. And I'm like, I'm not talking about her education level. I know she's stupid. I'm talking about the deep soul personality. And then they would still go,
I think it's interesting how she's defined as stupid. It's mostly through like performance at school, which is a huge point of stress for Japanese children and American children as well.
Yeah.
Maybe to a lesser extent, I don't know.
Children stress about school, I think, is a fair
and so
generalization.
her feeling stupid and wanting to escape the mundane school life to do something more meaningful with all of the let's say adolescent passion of the excitable youth. Like that's the wish fulfillment, that's the excitement.
We have a classic, a little bit 5-man band kind of dynamic with the main Sailor Scouts. We've got Mars as the Lancer and Mercury as the the sensitive kind of smart one.
Tactician.
He's a tactician. Yes, there you go. And then like you got
the couple.
Jupiter's muscle.
I'm sorry, don't you mean the cousins?
Yeah, that comes way later though. They're not the 5-man band. But yes, we get the big one with Jupiter, and then why is her name escaping me in this moment? The other Venus, Jesus. What is her role? I'm like dying.
She's the one who had the prequel manga that was based on her. So a lot of people already knew who she was.
Sailor V, yeah. Codename Sailor V, mind you. So the archetypes of the different characters are there just, I guess, in some ways so that you have more merchandise to sell, more like group costume ideas for cosplayers. A lot of different powers and conflicts that you can create with the shows, but I think like largely you're selling just the idea of being a magical girl as like a lifestyle.
Right.
There
and
was
then
a really interesting article.
With these friends, you know, like if you're lonely and feel bad at school, like don't worry about it. You can go off and save the day with, you know, your 5 best friends and a mysterious, like handsome stranger.
Right. I read an interesting article about the latest mega franchise of magical girls from Toei Animation, which you know most of these shows end up being Toei. But that's the Pretty Cure series, otherwise known as Precure. So this is an article from Anya C. Benson called Becoming Pretty Cure, Building the Lifestyle Text in Japanese Girls Franchises. And she talks about like the way that these anime that like have long running seasons upon seasons and so much merchandise for people to buy and to consume, that what they're selling isn't just you can be magical too, but you can be the type of girl who could become magical girl. And that comes with a lot of like caveats and quid pro quos. So she writes, to become a cure is not just to dress a certain way and own certain toys, it is also to enact certain societally acceptable norms of behavior. And uses the example of the ways the anime characters will be shown studying and the ways that they can, through marketing and through selling specific items, have the children also be studying in the same way and be good students. And that other activities that they encourage are practicing hiragana, participating in dance lessons, decorating cute cakes. And so she writes, Precure prioritizes pedagogical play that positions becoming an ideal subject as a skill attainable through the performance of specified learnable actions. So what do you think about that as sort of something that's drawn throughout the Mahou Shoujo genre, that it's educating girls on what it is to grow up and how to grow up to be specifically the kind of girl that the show wants them to be?
I feel like with Precure specifically, it is aimed towards like Sailor Moon. You could say is like had a wide age range in Japan potentially. Like Precure is specifically more aimed at like 6-year-olds. Right. So it's a lot of times like I've seen like a few episodes here and there of some stuff, but it's pretty like this stuff is kind of just like trying to think of how it's almost like I'm thinking about like it's Nick like Jr. almost, right. Even though it's like, or the things like, oh, like kind of like with American TV, how you had like we had some like
Barbie's
education
dream house, you know,
yeah,
it's like
stuff like that.
This is how you know, learn how to take care of your friends, and like, oh, you should also study for the big test on Sunday, or I don't know why a test is on Sunday, but
I feel like, well, yeah, a lot of this is kind of hidden in a magical girl show of them like fighting soccer ball monsters and monsters that are giant ramen bowls. That is those are two different monsters that appear in Heart Catch Pretty Cure, which is the only one I've seen a bit of. It's great. Incredible. But yeah, it's just like it seems like it's a common element in a lot of like children's TV of like learning while you're watching.
Yeah. So aside from the fact that, you know, Pretty Cure is definitely a little bit didactic in its, or prescriptivist, I guess you might say,
sure,
in how it, in the message it's trying to convey to its viewers, and part of that is by nature of the culture it's coming from, and then another part, the audience it's technically supposed to be targeting, children. You know, similarly to American shows with, you know, we see like My Little Pony, these shows sometimes get appropriated by older audiences and male audiences, and sort of turned into fetish objects.
Sure, yeah. And I think that it's all sort of baked into anime in a sense, that it's sort of inseparable. Because at least this is the way that a lot of the theorization goes, because anime is essentially a transmedia property. that is designed to sell merchandise. So there's a great book by Mark Steinberg called Anime's Media Mix, where he discusses the concept of the dynamically immobile character image, which is he's arguing basically that the fact that Japanese limited animation focuses on these really like action-filled, very emotive still images, because the animation is so limited that they're animating on 3s, whereas like even in America we mostly animate on 2s. You're animating on 3s and you're only moving certain parts of the frame and other things are very still, that you create an image that is very transferable into like sticker form or action figure form.
Or, you know, I'm thinking just back to like early internet usage of, you know, anime characters and anime images, and like, you know, the like super crushed 23 megabyte like GIFs that people would use as their, you know, like icons on different, like on DeviantArt. Yeah. On forums and anywhere, you know, and that people could have, you know, you just have a picture of Sailor Moon going blah, and then like sparkle text at the bottom, and then like there's your personality, you know, like it's very expressive, and I totally think that definitely leads to a proliferation of the images. I think both online in today's culture, and then I think what you were leaning towards in merchandising and products.
But even you know, internet, like Steinberg talks about in the 60s, like the very first like Tetsuan Atomu chocolates, that it's just chocolate with Astro Boy's face on them. And here's like his main claim,
eat that up.
His main claim is, you know, here we come to the important role that the specific image regime of anime played in character merchandising. Anime enabled a greater proliferation of visually consistent character images across media forms than had previously been possible. This was in part because of the consistency of the image was maintained and dynamized by the particular relation between stillness and motion found in the television anime. So, and that persists today, even though the limited animation has become more fluid, there's still the stillness and the style of anime has a relationship with the time sort of freezing. And we can see that in the transformation sequence, where time stands still so that we can get a nice good look at basically like the one bit of motion that we can afford in every episode.
And it's great because
the attacks are all just like holding a wand and then lasers shoot out, you know.
I mean, I think the transfer, you know, if we're talking about how the technology influences the end product, you know, the transformation sequence, it's the same sequence every episode. You don't have to reanimate that. You just reinsert it into wherever it needs to go, you know, and then it cuts back to, and now I'm in this pose in my sailor outfit.
And then like as the seasons go on, especially for Sailor Moon, it's like, ooh, you can tell things have changed because now she has feathers on her outfit.
Right. Oh, she's more powerful now because there's rainbows on her skirt.
Which also encourages you to buy the newest toys. So Kumiko Saito has this really fantastic article that I really encourage everyone to read. It's called Magic, Shoujo, and Metamorphosis. And she talks about that the technique of breaking down the transformation sequence into individual body parts and describes it as fragmentation, which is the same technique that would be used to sell, you know, Transformers toys, or even like a car, or you know, a piece of furniture. You break it down into its components parts to make it appear more attractive to potential buyers. And then she says, while it can simultaneously redeem the lack of human and material resources. So it's like the object is itself, it pre-exists the production of these toys. And then she says, the spatial dissection of the female body allows the camera's gaze to explore the depth of the viewer's affection in the disembodied body. So what she's saying there is that because when you're watching these transformation sequences, you zoom in close on the arm as it's clothed, and the chest as it's clothed, and the hair as it grows, you're almost taking away the body of the actual character and replacing it with a product that's consumable. And she says that, you know, goes all the way back to, you know, Minky Momo back in the 80s. That's not like an invention of the like nude transformation sequences that you know explicitly fetishize the female body, that are specifically marketed at men. It goes back to the ones that were for kids and that were about growing up and becoming a woman, you know, those kind of things.
Right. But it's about, I mean, that is, like everyone, every weeb, every otaku knows that like half the point of anime is all of the other junk that comes with it, you know, is that you can, sure, you go and watch your favorite anime, but then you can buy 50,000 shirts, you can buy 1 billion wallets, you can buy 1 million key charms, and you know, part of that is the like capitalistic, like this is officially licensed stuff from the show, and then another part of it is fan created items and merchandise that can come out of these shows.
Right. And I think that's also some of the reason why, like, excluding, I'm not talking as much about creepy older fans, but more just like people who like stuff, is they're the ones that have money. So it's like they're like like a Sailor Moon figure. A little girl might want a Sailor Moon figure, but somebody who like works an office job and like Sailor Moon, they're more likely to be able to afford that figure. So I think that's why there is a lot of, you know, there is a lot of marketing towards like older fans, or
well, I think it's also just marketing
fans, just because it's like they got money to spend.
Right. I think it's also just market segmentation, because an adult is less likely to buy like the plastic compacts or the wands that a girl might buy, and those are much cheaper to produce. So there's different segments that create different levels of profitability, but you want to appeal to everybody if you can. And since there isn't like a massive pushback to these male fans who sort of, in Japan at least, kind of have like an ownership of anime as a whole, it's, you know, it's not really contested. So I think like this brings us to, I think, some of the more subversive ones, because now that we're bringing in like these critiques of magical girl anime, there are shows that sort of try and handle these critiques themselves, and also try and sort of create a feeling of like, haha, aren't I better than the people who watch, you know,
Pretty Cure.
Or what's that other one? Doremi.
Okay, I will say this: Doremi features a character who has cancer, so it goes hard. I have not seen it,
but in a children's show kind of way.
It's depressing.
Yes,
but like it goes deep.
So why don't we talk about? Do you want to do Madoka first, or Utena first, or Kill la Kill, or what?
I'd say we starting with Utena, just because it's the chronologically, and also since the director of Utena directed a lot of episodes of Sailor Moon.
Yeah, so. The gayest ones, as
he directed the episode where they go to the where Mamoru's sitting on the train by himself like a loser. If you know which one I'm talking about.
I don't.
They go to the fairyland and there's a train.
Oh, that one.
Oh, he was trying his hardest to get Tuxedo Max to get killed. He's like, I don't want this guy. And then they were all like, all the other, like the investors or whoever, the producers were like, you can't kill off Tuxedo Mask.
Girls like Tuxedo Mask.
Yeah.
And he's like, I don't want this man here.
He sucks.
Girls only.
But yeah, so Revolutionary Girl Utena is set in a high school. Maybe it's sort of
it's
an
high school combo middle
time
school.
And space.
Utena is 14. I looked this up the other day because I was trying to remember. So it's like
but there's high schoolers there as well.
Yeah.
And there's also adults there who also hit on the 14-year-olds and have sex with them semi-consensually. But that is the nature of the show. It's a show about consent and about freedom and about freedom of choice. Because this girl, she was visited by a prince in her childhood and was so enamored with him that she decided to become a prince herself. So it's a subversion in the vein of Princess Knight from way back in 1953. There's a through line here. And like Sapphire of the Princess Knight series, She fights with a sword in order
Mhm.
to defend the things that she believes in and save princesses. That's her main goal. So during a typical episode, you're dealing with a personal problem that somebody's having, often related to romance or to familial relationships. And then at the end, there is a magical duel for the fate of the Rose Bride, this character Anthe, who is destined to be wedded to whoever wins the rose duels up on top of this magical tower. So what is the show about? What is it saying about magical girls? What is it saying about anime in general and about women's issues?
Saying girls should kiss, and that's valid.
But they don't kiss. They don't ever kiss in the show.
That's the movie.
That's the movie. Yeah, so Utena ends up falling in love ambiguously with Anthe, who is portrayed as this like incredibly passive, like detrimentally passive character, in that she's always subservient to Utena and then further to her sicko brother, who is spoilers, by the way, for all of these shows, for this show and later for Madoka. But yeah, so like by the end of the show, Utena sacrifices herself for Anthe's freedom, and it's sort of supposed to represent a cycle of abuse of women and a patriarchal subjugation of women that is in some ways escaped or at least tweaked, and that is the revolution, at least to my understanding.
Yeah, I would agree with that reading.
So in what ways does it follow magical girl tropes, and what ways does it not?
One thing is just Utena is it's not just the girls that transform for this element. And it's like, I feel like because Utena is the focus, she is the like titular magical girl in this case. But with having like it's everyone transform, it's like the focus is basically like Utena's own ideals versus whoever she's fighting at that time, be it, you know, a kind of antagonistic character or a character, especially in the Black Rose arc, who's been kind of taken advantage, that's had their weakness taken advantage of. And from there, like I always related, but someone once told me that it's like when you watch Utena for the first time, you're watching the plot, you're paying attention to what's going on. Every rewatch of Utena, you're still paying attention to the plot, but you're more just focusing on Anthe, figuring out, okay, what is she actually doing in this scene? I thought it was this, but like what tricks did she play in this scene?
It's highlighting the passiveness of a female character to obscure the ways in which she is subtly active, which is also the work that most feminist critics do with a lot of the tearjerker films of the the silent era and the early Hollywood era. So I mean, I think it's doing a lot of the same things that feminist criticism has always done.
Yeah.
I also think that it follows in some ways the shoujo archetype of these are coming of age stories, and it draws specifically on a really dark and twisted kind of coming of age story, which is Hermann Hesse's 1919 novel Demian, which they borrow this monologue sort of from it about if the world's shell, the world is an egg, and if we break the shell, we'll destroy the world, but the chick will be born, and if we don't break the shell, the chick will die. And that's part of this Demian novel, and it's all about the darkness of becoming an adult. And so that is Utena's story as well, is like revealing her sexuality and achieving sexual maturity by the end of it, right?
Also, in relation to the whole sexual maturity thing, Utena is probably the only show where the recap episodes are required viewing because plot happens in them. Very important plot.
Sexual maturity
plot. There's definitely I think other shows or recap episodes like pull similar gimmicks. But like, yeah.
Utena is famous for like really bizarre and kind of symbolically choppy recap episodes. It does have a transformation sequence, doesn't it? Right? So it follows that.
Everyone gets a
everyone transforms, but there's a repeated one in every episode of Utena getting shoulder pads and kind of a pleat around her, boys uniform or boys school uniform that she wears.
The boys school uniform that none of the other boys wear, that they say this is a boys school uniform, and all the other boys are there wearing this ugly green thing, and then Utena's there with a stylish black coat.
Right.
She's showing them up.
Yeah, and so the whole thing is that she's a female prince fighting for a princess. This is like a trope that you'll see repeated in a lot of these things as well. It's also a major theme in Princess Tutu as well, right? The princess saving the prince, as opposed to the prince saving the princess, which is the conventional fairy tale narrative, right?
I mean, I think it plays into the like definitely into the power fantasy of it. Like, even back in Sailor Moon, like there's the classic image of Tuxedo Mask, like my job here is done. And then Usagi going, but you didn't do anything, right. Like there's the in the same way that it's fun in sort of a gender wars kind of way for, I think, young girls to see, like, I can be the hero. I can have the romantic onus kind of taken on myself, and that I can be the savior, and I don't have to be saved. But, I think Princess Tutu still definitely, like, yes, she wants to save the prince, but it's in this very like self-sacrificing kind of way, like it's not in the, yes, I will save the prince and then he will definitely fall in love with me. It's like, oh, well, how could he ever fall in love with me? I'm just a little duck, quack, quack.
Right. Or in Utena's case, she refuses to acknowledge that she wants to be desired, by whoever is currently desiring her at the moment. Because she wants to be a prince and be the one who desires others.
Right. And this idea that masculinity is sort of tied to the active pursuit, right. I think is
the self and the other, the woman being othered and being the other. I want to point to, this is like from the abstract of an article by Lien Fan Chen, which is called The Hysterical Subject of Shoujo. And she's kind of talking about this show and what we'll talk about in a second, Madoka Magica, but saying, whereas shoujo heroines are granted magic power as a form of female empowerment, the symbolic system of anime posits shoujo heroines both as the subject and the other, emphasizing their sexuality through visual symbols and narratives. Situated in psychoanalytic frameworks, this essay highlights shoujo heroines' persistent quest after who am I to others as the hysterical subject who fully recognizes her subject self as an object in the masculine order. So even as these characters try and like reject their objectification or commodification by the anime system, they're still, by the end of the show, sort of acknowledging their objects, their otherness, their being pursued by others, and also they end up sort of sacrificing themselves for the sake of another, who is then still saved by them, which I think it's an interesting sort of trend that even in the subversions, like there's never a point where like the female character actually gets to step out of the story and say, I'm just going to be myself for my own sake and not for the sake of, this system that's being perpetuated. In Utena's case, it's really just that, she wants to be a prince, but in the end she kind of is a princess that needs to be saved by another princess that she saved, and it becomes kind of cyclical.
But it's cute.
It is cute. It's very cute.
Except when there's manipulation involved, but
yes, minus the manipulation.
But yeah, I know there's an early episode of Utena that kind of relates to what you were talking about, where because it's like the first time after she loses a duel, where she feels like, oh, I'm a failure. And like when she feels like a failure, she reverts into like, wearing the female uniform and trying to be a kind of, oh, I'm going to be this perfect demure girl. This is all I can be, because, and then it's her friends basically snap her out of it and are just like, kind of like, what are you doing? This isn't you. Like, this is like, and then, she's able to, break free of it. And then despite being, because like when she challenges Toga again, she's still in the school uniform, if I remember correctly, during that fight. The female school uniform. And she still ends up being able to kick his ass, and then goes back to, basically kind of like, all right, like, even though I experienced failure, I'm gonna, I'm gonna fight on to protect Anthe.
Right. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the biggest supposed subversion of the show that she rejects cuteness. That cuteness is the power in shoujo, right? Mm-hmm. When you become more cute and more, girly and frilly, you become more powerful. And she's sort of rejecting that by saying, I'm going to present more masculinely. But in the end, because of the way that anime is structured, people are still buying plenty of cute, beautiful Utena dolls and figures and I mean, posters and whatnot.
It's the same inevitable conclusion from like, the Hunger Games movies, where the whole point of that is that, isn't it fucked up to watch teenagers fight to the death? That's messed up, man. Here's a whole movie where teenagers fight to the death. Wild, like, I don't know, like and like the marketing around all of the Hunger Games stuff, I feel like it runs totally counter to the actual message of those books and those movies. And I think it's the same thing with anime like this, and especially Madoka suffers from this so incredibly. With
should we transition into that?
With just the absolute, capitalist commodification and like recuperation of everything like that happens in Madoka, and how these girls are just dolls for you to buy and pillows for you to cuddle, and like,
which is it's built into the subject of the show itself in the form of this like capitalist like contract that is formed between these magical girls and this otherworldly entity known as Cube, the incubator, whose job it is to harvest the energy from teenage girls' emotions.
I do have to say,
by killing many people.
Yes.
And treating them as livestock.
Yes. I love the way that Madoka as a show like tries to explain why all of these magical creatures like would be coming to Earth and giving these like 13-year-olds fantastic powers, and
it's like because you're hormonal, because you're like on your period.
Well, no, I don't think it's that. I think
it's a little like, it's a little, condescending.
I disagree. Yeah. I just think that's a time period when like, I don't think it's just
emotions
are
big.
Emotions
boys
are big.
Or girls.
And it's like, that's the point.
But they don't go after boys. That's what they say. They say, we go after girls because of your population, the most emotional and the biggest turn from hope to despair is teenage girls.
But that is kind of true. Like in health class,
it's a little
in sixth grade, they tell you, they're like, I do remember my health teacher being like, oh yeah, boys are boring. Their hormones are just like this. Girls, they just go up and down like this.
But I don't know. I mean, like, yes, it's true to some extent. It's definitely a little bit like bioessentialist, but I think, to that female audience, it feels true. You're like, yeah, I remember being 13 and like, even if I wasn't having friend drama, my emotions were still like up and down.
It feels true to the male viewers as well, because they're trying to explain in universe why it has to be magical girls, where the truth is, obviously it's because of marketing, that you're marketing a show to girls. You want all of the magical beings fighting to be girls. It's about market segmentation, but within the universe of the show, it has to have like a logical explanation. And so it goes this kind of stereotypical place of like teenage girls, they're crazy.
But like, I mean, yes, but also as someone who was a teenage girl, sure. Big feelings, man, big feelings.
Right. But I mean, it goes beyond that because they also specifically reference the sort of selling of these girls' bodies, which is, you know, recontextualizing all of the previous magical girl anime that we've seen. But literally, when you make a contract, you give up your body and get turned into a little egg.
Yeah, your soul becomes an egg.
A little Fabergé egg that eventually will, you know, you'll lose your body entirely and then turn into a big amorphous witch. And the relationship between girlhood and adulthood being the transition from magical girl to witch is an interesting sort of paradigm that they're addressing. What do you make of that?
I mean, the only thing I can say in regards to that, I don't agree 100% with like witch being adulthood, just because like one of probably the most central adult character is Madoka's mother, who is incredibly stable. You know, she's the lawyer, she's the moneymaker in her house. And so I think if she didn't exist in that show, I would agree 100%. But like they're showing you as a successful woman. So I think that goes more with the whole thing of they're being taken advantage of and having their emotions turned against them to become something that they're not.
But I'm glad that you brought up that character, because I think it's an interesting point of analysis. This, you know, Madoka's mother, she's constantly stressed. Her child has to take on sort of a motherly role with her, waking her up in the morning. She works long hours. She drinks a lot.
But that's like Japanese work culture in general, you know?
Right. But I think, like, let's break that down then. What do you make of Madoka's mother character? What role does she play in this allegory of little girls making contracts to become essentially like contract workers for this like megalomaniacal livestock harvesting corporation? So like, what does the mom represent in that? What, you know, she talks about her dreams, and like her dream is to have a particular lifestyle, and Madoka takes that and says, well, the lifestyle I want is to be a magical girl, you know? So what role does she play in that allegory for capital?
I mean, I think she's almost supposed to be like a grounding and guiding force, you know, like she's in the background mostly. She's not super plot relevant. She doesn't you know, like rush in and like give a big speech to Madoka at any point, and Madoka's like, oh, you're so right, mom. But you know, she's the role model, and I think in an interesting way she's sort of a modern Japanese sort of imagination of feminism, in the same way that like the working mom is in American media as well, where, you know, she's got it all. Like, yeah, she works long hours, but she's also
a mom.
She's a mom. She's
married to a nice man who stays home and takes care of the baby.
But I think that's precisely it. Like, she is this role model, and yet Madoka ends up by the end having dissolved her consciousness in order to rewrite the laws of the universe as a way to break the cycle of exploitation of young girls. It's almost sort of drawing a comparison, I think, between exploitative practices with young girls' bodies and capital itself. That, you know, what you know, Madoka's mom gets from pursuing a job is she gets to live her dream, but it costs her so much in the form of she's always exhausted. She's not able to properly attend to her daughter, who then, you know, is dissolved into a god or whatever, you know, sheds her earthly body. And I think that in some ways, like, she's meant to draw our eye to working women in general. And I think that the show is in some ways like critical of the idea of socializing young girls to become working capitalists, career women. And I think it's almost against that, or it's maybe in favor of a kind of youth, like a nostalgia for youth, that like it sucks that children have to grow up to become just
workers,
slaves to capital, basically,
right, regardless of gender. But we're using a woman,
but focusing on women,
girls.
I think because it's a sensitive issue for men, the idea of like working women, that I think that probably the creators have a problem with working women.
That
really,
I do disagree 100%. Just because I'm familiar with, like I've mentioned before, I'm very familiar with this writer, and a big thing in a lot of his works is critiquing the status quo. He does not want things to remain stagnant, especially because I'm pretty sure that he put all of his things he doesn't like into one of the magical girls, and that's Mommy, because Mommy's whole existence is status quo is good. Because once she, in the alternate universe, or one of the other universes, when she learns the truth, she goes crazy and tries to kill everybody, because this isn't right. This isn't normal. She can't deal with the truth, which is why in the future, in the other cycles, Homura is like, I can't tell her, she's going to go completely crazy. So her idea is,
well, like, she kills everyone to preserve their innocence, so they don't turn into witches, right?
Yeah, and that's I think that's seen as a negative by the story, because she goes basically insane in that scene. So
right. I think ultimately Madoka is, it plays into some unfortunate potential like stereotypes of the self-sacrificing woman, and that woman's power comes through this idea of sacrifice instead of self-improvement, the way it does often in shonen. But like, I think that ultimately it is asking for a change to happen, and even though it's maybe mildly traditional in how that change is occurring, again, with the sacrifice of a woman, like she's basically Jesus, she's dying to save our sins.
But I think what you say about sacrificing yourself for what is the different future. I think that there's an interesting article by a theorist named Tate James, who tries to theorize like what is really changed by Madoka's sacrifice, where she determines that now when magical girls feel despair, they won't turn into witches, they'll simply die. James writes, Madoka Magica's revolutionary potential is ultimately harnessed for a regressive vision of female purity and passivity.
No, but the whole point is that it ends the entire cycle.
Right, but it ends that cycle with death, rather than the magical girls turning into these witches, which James draws on these other theorists, Cleto and Ball, who's described the witches' labyrinths, which are represented visually with these colorful, symbolic cacophony of random flashing lights and drawings in different art styles, which they call the witches' labyrinths narrative spaces that they control. They're more than physical spaces. They're complex non-linear narratives where the symbols are telling the stories of their lives and their traumas and their heartbreaks in the form of like virtually inscrutable cacophonous images. And so James writes, as witches, the girls had power, creativity, individual expression, an embodiment in the midst of their despair, the power to shape the world around them with their assembled story worlds. But with Madoka's new system, where they die as soon as they feel that despair, even that ambiguous power and creativity is denied them, and they are literally wiped out of existence. That they are like the witches are like an impure blight on the world, these, depressed and lonely women. And that if they simply died while in their pure state of, magical girlhood, where everything is bright and happy, that would be a more ideal system. And then just one more bit. she argues that the magical girls embody female-coded purity at the same time as they enact taboo or male-coded traits, which does question the idea of the construction of gender and what, whether girls should remain pure or whatever. But ultimately, it still doesn't question the moralism inherent to the dichotomy of purity and impurity. So it's like there's a criticism of this binary, but it still ultimately reinforces the binary.
I see. I can see that. Yeah, I hadn't considered it in that way before. It's interesting. I still like the show, but it's a definitely new dynamic.
Everyone always has, especially with Madoka, like you talk to 10 different fans and they'll all give you 10 different interpretations of what they think the show is about.
Yeah.
So it's all very interesting. And something, this isn't directly magical girl related, but it is Madoka related, is that there is a are you familiar with Kamen Rider?
Yes.
There is a show that is written by Gen Urobuchi, Madoka's author. It's basically Madoka, but Kamen Rider.
Interesting.
So it's
another really subversive look at a children's show.
Yeah.
But this time more of a shonen.
More of a shonen thing. And so it's very interesting to see, like, because he has his character tropes that he uses. And it's just interesting to see, like, oh, this is the character that's more like Madoka. And they're all, in this case, because it's Kamen Rider, those are more represented by older male figures. But it's just interesting to see that whole idealized purity, or like that is Madoka, is seen in a male character in this franchise. So I just always thought that was interesting.
Yeah, the different way that it's embodied.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I have not finished it, but I do need to get back to that.
Yeah, I think as far as like the way that Madoka fits within the larger, magical girl framework, yes, it's talking about the commodification of women's bodies in a very critical way that I think is interesting. Yes, it's talking about, capital and, an adulthood and retaining the innocence of childhood, even in adulthood, the power of wishing, the power of belief. But also it's about, the same things that in some ways like Sailor Moon might be about, with, it's like young, beautiful, pretty girls fighting more monstrous looking, often female villains. Your sort of read up Repulsas for Power Rangers fans,
right? Or
your more mature witch-like characters, and that Madoka, including that like magical girls turn into witches, is acknowledging the inherent, sort of conflict in that that magical girls are trying not to grow up in some ways. That it's like a kids next door type narrative, kids versus grown-ups.
Right. You turn 13 and you can't be a kid anymore. You turn 18, you're not a magical girl anymore. You're a magical woman.
But that ultimately it's, it's like their cuteness must be preserved, is like the thing, that their purity is in their cuteness, and when they lose that and become these like monstrous beings, that's like a bad thing, as opposed to it being a freeing, revolutionary kind of thing.
Yeah, I think some part of that is definitely due to just like the tropes and associations we have in any visual medium, like, not saying that shouldn't be challenged or looked at and reimagined.
No, it's interesting.
But I think it's definitely part and parcel for how we tend to view good characters versus bad characters on screen in general.
Right. And I think maybe we can end sort of with the idea of cuteness in general. what it is to be cute, and that's something that Kumiko Saito writes about a lot in her piece. She writes that like cuteness is a concept associated with youth, passivity, femininity, overall powerlessness. But the recent brand of magical girls as cute battle heroes is a paradox of claiming power in powerlessness. And she relates that to a lot of the ways that people theorize, transnational media in general, with Japan often coming to represent a colonized culture, or and in media studies terms, like to be colonized is also to be somewhat feminized. this is like a theoretical framework that sort of goes back to like early cultural theorists. But the idea that girls become a symbol of Japan itself as they're sort of invaded and then encouraged to form these like contracts to protect Japan from outsiders because they were, literally colonized by America and forced to rewrite their entire country to like what we wanted it to be.
Right.
So she writes about sort of the transition from cool Japan, which was like a marketing push to like spread out our culture to the world, to a kind of cute Japan where it's like, we're harmless. We don't mean anybody any trouble. We're okay. And that cuteness is like a form of diplomacy for Japan itself. So
anime diplomacy.
I mean, that's what it is though, because it's like the symbol of Japan being someone that produces things that other cultures consume. And so she writes that the masculinized image of Japan at work has given way to that of feminized Japan at play, or Japan as play. And the changes we observe do not necessarily derive from the feminization of men, but from a new configuration of gender that wields its power in its youthfulness and cuteness. So I think it's an interesting sort of talking about a fear of growing up, a fear of entering adulthood, as depicted through magical girls, and that the fact that grown men are also enjoying magical girl anime might be a sign that they are also fearful of the parts of adulthood that are terrifying: sexuality, marriage, child rearing, those kind of
relationships, adult relationships.
Right. I mean, anime has, shoujo anime has romance. It's a big part of it. But in the early anime, romance was a reward for giving up your magical powers. That was how a lot of the like Minky Momo type shows end, is like they give up their magic and then get to go be an adult and date. But now it's,
part and parcel.
It's the power of dating and romance is power because it's not overtly sexual, You're just being cute with people.
Well, I mean, at least the manga of Sailor Moon definitely challenges that in a bit, because I know there is art that she drew, she being the author of Sailor Moon, of like Usagi basically naked in bed, like
with a tuxedo mask.
I forget the specifics, but it's just like her like cuddling up in bed. So I feel like there is a thing where like it's kind of like the anti-Narnia in the sense where with the Susan, when she grows up and she's just like, oh, I'm more interested in lipstick and like I don't want those imaginary games anymore. So Usagi is able to like use lipstick and like be sexual and still be a magical girl,
right? Like the whole Future Moon thing where she sees her future self married with a tuxedo mask, and she still has her magical powers. She is still a princess. She is still powerful, whatnot. I think it's almost like the magical powers don't have to be given up, but they are sort of they're like a metaphor now for the blossoming of sexuality and
they always have
teenagehood.
I mean, going back to,
but now they're not something that needs to be abandoned.
Akachan,
Right. But it's not something that needs to be abandoned for romance. You don't have to give up your sexuality to have a happily ever after. Now your sexuality can be a part of the happily ever after.
Yeah. So as far as like, as sexuality and romance is contained within these shows, this is again Saito writing, because the genre's message now resides in the reappreciation of shoujohood, feminine sexuality, which is one of the most attractive elements to male viewers, must be expressed in the form of its denial, a foundation of the like lolicon aesthetic.
Right.
So she describes like when like adult men are watching these like teenage girl shows, they're locating eroticism in its absence, which I think is like probably the best description of what lolicon is, psychologically, that it's going specifically to the thing that doesn't have sex in it, that excludes sex, and using that as the turn on, as the focus.
Right.
And so that's why, you know, they would go to a My Little Pony thing, not necessarily because there's an inherent sexuality to a purple horse, but because there's an inherent unsexuality to it. And their desire, the moe desire, is like to squeeze sexuality out of it.
Right.
By force.
Yep. I think that's probably an accurate reading.
And maybe that goes.
I don't want to end on such a.
Maybe that goes full circle with Kill la Kill. Do we want to just kind of briefly touch on Kill la Kill? Sure. Is it magical girl Kill la Kill? And how is it, and what is it saying about magical girl anime in general? I think of it as very closely tied to Utena. Honestly, even though I don't know if the creators are even, you know, big fans of Utena, but
I mean, I'm sure they've seen Utena. I don't know if you're allowed to work in the anime industry if you haven't seen Utena, you know.
But just the duels in a specifically high school setting, and the high school being representative of like fascist control over women's bodies. Like it reminds me very much of Utena.
I mean, that's Studio Trigger, their whole deal, you know.
Right. Well, I mean, their whole deal, but then didn't they also make like Little Witch Academia, which is like about like
with also different directors? So it's like enough. And that was like the director of like Little Witch specifically said it was like, oh yeah, he was like, no panty shots, none. This is for
Harry
families.
Potter. Yeah. This is Harry Potter, but it's our
Disney.
spin on it. But yeah, Kill la Kill, the concept of the show is that the outfits that the Sailor Scouts are wearing, these sailor outfits, are literally like parasitic, sucking the blood out of young girls to prey on their sexuality. But then it undercuts that by saying, actually, it's their choice, and they really want to do it, and they actually are symbiotic with these parasitic clothing.
But
it's meant to sell toys.
You know, I mean, I think it falls into the same thing as Madoka, you know, where in trying to explain away the tropes of the genre, you know, like why teenage girls, why skimpy outfits? Oh, skimpy outfits because if the clothing touches too much of you, then it will overcome your mind and you'll be a zombie. So you need it as skimpy as possible so that, you know, like that's why. But, you know, it's more complicated than just that, because the clothes are also a metaphor for like authoritarian control and conformity. And, you know, it's got a lot of things going on. So I think it complicates any sort of like reductivist, like, oh, like, you know, when it came out, the backlash was like, Kill la Kill bad, girls skimpy outfit, not feminist, blurred. And like, absolutely, you know, like, did the show need to do that? No. Does it sort of tie into other larger points that they were making? Yes. Like, it's not.
I just think it goes back to the Lian Fan Shen thing that I said, where it's the hysterical subject fully recognizes her subject self as an object in the masculine order, and then just says like, I don't care, like I'm just going to do it anyway. And it's about the, you know, the symbolic system of anime, which turns women's bodies into toys and commodities and whatever, that you can't break free of that, even within the narratives that you're constructing within it that are critiquing it.
Right.
So I think that's it.
And then with Kill la Kill, everyone's pretty much naked by the end.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah. It's true. It's, you know, it's supposed to be like, look, it's everybody, it's fine. But like at the end of the day, the largely male consumer base is going to be largely consuming it in the way that they always have.
Right.
And you know, girls will continue to consume Pretty Cure in the way that they always have, as like a lifestyle brand where they can go visit the Pretty Cure park and dress up as Pretty Cure and, you know, buy a magic wand and whatnot. It's all like for toys and it's for exploitation, but it's also a very important part of our cultural framework for what femininity is.
Right. I mean, it's Disney princesses in Japan.
Yeah.
That's a good comparison.
Yeah, I feel remiss that we didn't talk as much about you know, love between girls, which has become a very, important part of it.
Yeah.
And it's in some ways a fetish object for men as well, but in some ways is also revolutionary in its own right.
Mm-hmm.
Or the many examples of boys becoming magical girls that have emerged in recent years, or trans magical girls, or
maybe we'll have to, do a revisit episode where we come back
maybe
and we
we
talk
will.
about all the beautiful queerness of magical girls.
And Sarah, would you like to come back for that if we do?
Oh, that sounds amazing. I've watched a few magical boy animes, so I could definitely talk about that.
Awesome.
Yeah. Is there anything that you'd like to say to close, or anything you'd like to plug?
Watch Symphogear. That's all I gotta say. It's
okay.
like Madoka, but what if Madoka
Rider
punched things instead?
All right. Do you want people to find you on the internet, or would you like to remain a mystery?
I'm in school, so I don't really do much stuff online.
Don't find me online. Sarah exists only on our podcast.
Any of your academic work you'd like to promote?
I'm becoming a podiatrist, so not really it's not academic. I'm a science person.
Well, we really appreciated your expertise on this one, and I think that it's an interesting conversation that will continue, of course, as long as we still have American adaptations of these things as well, and American media absorbing Japanese media in everything from Steven Universe to the sci-fi original series Magical Girl Friendship Squad, which I know got a lot of hate online, but I think is just it's just a silly little cartoon about magical girls who are millennials. It's magical girls by way of HBO's girls, basically, where they're trying to survive in a capitalist
right, but
also fighting monsters.
So many of the current animators grew up working in the industry, grew up watching Sailor Moon at this point, and so the media that they are creating is gonna crib from that in certain ways.
Right.
And be
Bee and Puppy Cat also is, a cute little animal giving a girl magical power so she can go do temp work. So the capitalist thing as well.
So many things. But thank you, everyone. Please tweet at us at Talking Tropes about what your favorite magical girl anime is, and we'd love to fight with you about who's best girl. Sounds great.
We love that.
Yeah. Well, by the power of the moon, we've podcasted you. Bye.
Pod Prism Power.
You can say bye, Sarah.
Bye.